I am honored to introduce a friend of mine, somebody that I have just been so thrilled to see ascend in American politics. His story is uniquely American. Growing up in poverty, difficult circumstances, serving his country honorably and heroically in the United States Marine Corps, building an amazing business, defying all the odds, becoming a U.S. Senator from the great state of Ohio, being an America First champion in Congress, and somebody who I know will bring this vision of a restoration of this country to Washington, D.C. to be a fighter for us all, and will be a loyal and courageous and bold partner with Donald Trump to make America great again. Join me in welcoming the next Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance.
Why don't we liberate these United States where the
God bless you all. Thank you.
Need it worse.
So JD, welcome to Arizona.
It's good to be here, man. Hello, Arizona. How we doing?
Now JD, I noticed we don't have any teleprompters here for you tonight. It's a little just off the cuff, taking questions and also questions from the audience. What do you make of it? How strange and bizarre it is. Kamala Harris has gone 40 plus days without taking a serious interview by herself or a press conference. By the way, how great is J.D. Vance with these press conferences? Did he not do a great job? What do you make of that?
You know, look, I mean, she's terrified of the media because she's terrified of the American people because she knows that if she speaks off the cuff, she's going to let them know just how completely radical she is. I mean, look, Kamala Harris, her entire campaign, think about this, she's trying to run away from every position that she had 3.5 years ago. She said she wanted to defund the police. And by the way, we should be thinking about and praying about those 2 Phoenix police officers who just got shot yesterday. God bless them and thank them for their service. Sounds like we got one in stable condition, and that's great, but hopefully both of them come out of it. But look, wanted to defund the police, now she says she doesn't. She wanted to ban fracking, now she says she doesn't. She was the border czar who opened the American southern border, but now all of a sudden she says she believes in border security. I joke with President Trump that she's gonna show up at a rally one day with a long red tie and the slogan, "Make America Great Again," because that's what Kamala Harris is doing. She's pretending to be, you know, we had a rally, Charlie, where the president, he called me right before I went out, and he said, "What do you think's going on here?" And I said, "I don't know, sir. I think maybe she wants my job." She realizes the Kamala Harris campaign is not going well, so she wants to replace me on the ticket. But we cannot let the American people forget how radical she is. She is exactly what she said she was. She is exactly what she has governed as. And the reason why she only talks to the American people with a teleprompter sitting in between them is because she knows the American people can smell a fraud, and she is a fraud, and we have to remind people of it.
And we saw this on display at the DNC in Chicago, where they pretended to be something they were not. Now, the radicalism they allowed to slip here or there, but basically it reminds us the country is not nearly as liberal as its leaders have become. That the country is a center-right country, that we want borders, that we do not want men in female sports.
Right.
That we want sound currency. And she knows that if she ran as what she truly is, a San Francisco liberal, that the people would reject that soundly. So we must not just remind her, but let's go through that record. It's very important, just on the police in particular. What did she do in 2020, 4 years ago? She donated to a bail fund, is that correct?
Yeah, it's almost hard to believe, Charlie, but I've looked this up. It actually is true. Remember when there were rioters in the summer of 2020 that burned down the city of Minneapolis and a bunch of other cities on top of it? Now, they didn't catch a whole lot of them, but they did catch some of those rioters, and guess who was at the front of the line trying to bail them out of prison? Kamala Harris, who now says that she supports police officers. We can never let her forget it. She was bailing out the people who were attacking police officers and burning down a great American city. That is the record of Kamala Harris. And let's have a president like Donald J. Trump who actually supports our police officers who keep us safe. It's very simple stuff. Now, But it actually gets worse, Charlie, because Kamala Harris, she likes to say that she was a tough on crime prosecutor. Her record as prosecutor is that she turned San Francisco into the high crime problem that it is today. San Francisco, by the way, one of the most beautiful cities in the country before Kamala Harris got a hold of it. And after she let the drug cartels, the drug dealers, and everybody else take hold of San Francisco, you're now at a situation in San Francisco where if you call the police, unless you're getting actively assaulted, they will say sometimes, call us back in a couple of hours. They're so overwhelmed, and that is the record of Kamala Harris. So we can't, again, Charlie, this is so important. We can't let people forget exactly who she is. And remember, it's not just that she said all these crazy things back in 2020, it's that she has governed like a San Francisco liberal.
And this is the kicker, that she's also attempting to do some sort of a mind manipulation trick. She's the current vice president of the United States, right, everybody? She's in office right now. So
Charlie, it takes a special level of shamelessness. And maybe I've only been in politics for 2 years, so I just haven't reached that level. But to look at the American people, even though she's reading off a teleprompter, and to say, on day one, we're going to make groceries and housing more affordable. On day one, Kamala Harris says this, we're going to tackle the American southern border. Kamala, day one was 3.5 years ago. What the hell have you been doing the whole time? And you'll have to forgive me. Thank you. But all the pastors in the room have to forgive me because I do sometimes talk like my mamaw. And she was a woman of very serious Christian faith, but she did love the F word every now and then. So hopefully that's the only curse word that I have.
Faith.
I'm going to try to rein it in.
Faith, yeah.
That's right. We've got faith. I need a little grace here.
But the shamelessness, as you were saying, is remarkable. And this is important. Is she'll say, on day one, I'll do this. So, okay, let's just take one example. If she was serious about securing the border, which for those of us that live here in this state, we are being invaded on a daily basis. We are being invaded. And it's so frustrating because a Democrat will be running for office and they'll raise a bunch of out-of-state money, like Ruben Gallego and previously Mark Kelly, and they'll run all these ads where they'll literally walk alongside Trump's border wall, and then they'll go to the Senate and vote against everything, but they will lie to the vote. You guys have seen those ads, right? And they are open border candidates. Kamala Harris now has Trump's border wall in her advertisement. And so, was she not
That's hard to believe. Even for me, that's hard to believe.
No, it's true. You guys saw that. The Trump's border wall was in her ad.
She stopped construction of the border wall on day one. That's what Kamala Harris did. So is it the border wall that's laying on the ground? Because that would be appropriate, because that's what Kamala Harris actually did. But it's also, my friends, you go through the list of policies. Some of this stuff is really hard. Public policy sometimes is really tough. Border security is actually not that hard, okay? It's simple. One, empower the Border Patrol to stop the bad guys when they try to come across, right? That's number one. Number two, deport people who come into this country illegally. That's number two. And number three is don't let people claim asylum and then bounce around in our country for 12 years awaiting a court date. Make them stay in Mexico if they want to claim asylum. That's the Remain in Mexico policy that works so well. And the contrast between President Trump, who did all of these things, he implemented the Remain in Mexico policy. He actually came up with it. He did actually deport people. He didn't let people take advantage of our asylum process. Kamala Harris on day one promised she was going to undo all of that stuff, and that's exactly what she did. And we have the border catastrophe now because of that. And Charlie, we have to remember here the incredible human toll of this stuff, because we have American citizens right now who are dying of fentanyl overdoses that the Mexican drug cartels are bringing into our communities. We have thousands, this is hard to believe, we have thousands of missing children because Kamala Harris has let the cartels sex traffic minors in our own country. And you know my story, Charlie, but Yeah, I was raised by a woman who struggled with addiction for a big chunk of my early life. It's one of the reasons why my grandmother played such a big role for me. And, Mom, I remember when she took something that she shouldn't have taken, and it almost took her life. And she was in a coma for a few days. And I remember praying, Lord Jesus, please let Mom wake up this time. And because she didn't take fentanyl, she did get that second chance. She's been clean and sober, by the way, for almost 10 years. And God bless her, and I'm so thrilled for that. But imagine, Charlie, if the poison that Kamala Harris is letting come across the border today had been coming across 15 years ago. I don't think that I would have gotten that second chance with my mom. And so to Kamala Harris and to every broken DC politician from Ruben Gallego on down, if you're not gonna do your job and you're not gonna stop this poison from coming into our country, our message on November 5th is you are fired, get out of there. We've actually got some political leaders who are gonna work for the American people.
And according to the Department of Homeland Security, it's 320,000 missing children. And here we are in a house of worship, a house of the Lord. And we as Christians, that alone should be a reason to vote for Donald J. Trump and Jd Vance.
Absolutely right.
That right there. And can you speak to that, JD? Because yes, we as Christians must care about the children. It is so clear in the scriptures. It says, it is better for you to have a millstone hung around your neck and thrown into the sea than to go after one of these little ones.
Amen.
And 320,000 children. JD, it's almost hard to believe.
It is hard to believe, but this is what our government leaders have done, 320,000 kids. And we know, by the way, a lot of those kids have lost their lives. A lot of those kids are being sex trafficked by some of the most evil people in the world. This is the wages of Kamala Harris's disastrous border policy, and it's happening every day in this country. We have to remember that they told us that Kamala Harris was the compassionate person when it came to the border. Remember when they said Donald Trump is the person who wanted to separate families? No, the way that you keep families together is to send a message that if you want to come through to this country, you've got to come through the proper channels. When you empower these cartels, when you tell everybody that they can come across illegally, that's what causes family separation on an industrial scale. Never let them tell you that Kamala Harris's border policies are compassionate. There are 320,000 voices of children crying out, telling us Kamala Harris is not compassionate. She is a disaster, and we cannot promote her to the Oval Office.
And they frame it as, you're right, a compassion issue. And it's not compassionate for anyone involved, including also, you guys feel it in our neighborhoods here in the Valley, with crime going up and the break-ins, and you guys see what's happening. And it's happening all across the Valley right now, where we have seen the toll of this illegal invasion, and they're sending them all across the country as well, where every single state has now become a border state. And now, God forbid, and I want you to speak about this, JD, because you speak about it so eloquently, God forbid, and this happens all the time, unfortunately, a 16-year-old makes a mistake at a party at 2 a.m. on a Saturday, where he takes a drug that otherwise would have just been, a bad night, but he could end up dead because of something laced with fentanyl. Can you speak about that? Because that is, every week we see that story coming out of the Valley.
Yeah, so I was in Valdosta, Georgia just a couple of weeks ago, and they showed me the interdiction unit where they interdict all the drugs that are coming into Valdosta, Georgia. 60,000 town, very small town. Boxes and boxes of candy. I'm talking about like Sour Patch Kids, Nerds, things like that. And I said, why are these in here? And it's because the cartels have figured out that if they make this stuff look like childhood candy, it's more likely to get through. So now what happens when a kid picks up a packet of Nerds on a playground or opens up a packet of candy in his high school, and now that kid is gonna die because he took a piece of candy? Or even to take it a step up. I mean, we're in a church and we believe in the Christian faith and forgiveness. We believe in second chances. It's one of the core messages of the gospel. It really bothers me when you hear about some kid who, they smoked a joint and it was laced with fentanyl, or they got into a pill and it was laced with fentanyl, and now a childhood mistake took their life. And you'll even hear sometimes when I talk about this, you'll hear sometimes people on the radical fringe say, well, they shouldn't have taken that in the first place. And that totally misses the point. And by the way, have some compassion for your fellow citizens, right? But I know, Charlie, you've got You've got young children. I've got a 7-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 2-year-old. They're with me here in Phoenix, actually. They came with us, and we even brought the dog. German Shepherds don't like the Phoenix weather, it turns out. But I think I want my kids to grow up in a country where our neighborhoods are safe enough they can make a mistake without it taking their life. And I want them to be able to deal with their childhood mistakes and with their problems and with their sins at church instead of having it destroy them. And that is what Kamala Harris has done. She's taken safety away from our kids. She's taken second chances away from our families.
And from a policy perspective, this is a decision. This is not happening to us. This is a very important thing,
That's right.
is that the Democrats and Kamala Harris, they frame the border issue as if it's this uncontrolled thing happening and that we have to just kind of manage it, as if it's like a natural disaster. Let's be clear, we are allowing it to happen. What is happening is an act of the will. Can you speak about that, JD?
Yeah, man, it's an unnatural disaster, and her name is Kamala Harris, right? That's exactly what's going on here, is we've got leadership that refuses to do its job. I mean, we have to remember, they came in bragging about the fact that they were gonna undo every single one of Donald Trump's border policies. Remember that? Remember 3.5 years ago when Kamala Harris didn't pretend to be a border hawk, she pretended to be what she is, an open borders radical, and they said, we're gonna do this on day one. We're gonna suspend deportations. We're gonna end the Remain in Mexico policy. They did every single thing that they promised that they were gonna do, and now they're trying to run from the consequences. And the way that they get away with this is so important, Charlie. The way that Kamala Harris gets away with this massive, dishonest operation is for us to not get out and vote and penalize these people. When our politicians lie to us, we have a response and we have an ability to push back. It's at the ballot box. So get out there, tell Kamala Harris, you are fired, and we're not gonna reward people who gaslight us and lie to us about what they've done in office.
And this state is one of the most consequential and one of the most crucial, which is why you're here.
Huge.
Especially this part of the valley. And just to reiterate what I said earlier, every single one of you going out with Turning Point Action and to chase ballots and to register voters, JD, we're seeing in this state, one of the buried leads is that this state is actually becoming more Republican, not more Democrat. In 2020,
Here.
in 2020, we had about 100,000 more registered Republicans than Democrats. 4 years later, we now have 260,000 more registered Republicans than Democrats. So we have become, and that's net, that is a net increase.
Huge.
And it's happening because everyday Americans are seeing the failure of the open border policies, of seeing what's happening internationally, which I definitely want to talk about, which does not get enough attention recently. But also, Phoenix, especially, and everyone here is feeling it. It used to be a decade ago one of America's most affordable cities. Remember that? Remember you used to brag to all of your friends and family in Chicago, LA, and New York? Well, come to Phoenix, you can afford anything. We are getting crushed by inflation here. Inflation in the Sun Belt is the worst in the country, from housing prices to grocery prices. Why is this happening, JD? Explain it, and what will Trump Vance do about it?
Yeah, so inflation's obviously complicated, but in some ways it's very simple. When you let in when you talk about housing, for example, you let in 25 million illegal aliens into this country. On the one hand, they're going to compete against Americans for scarce homes that are out there. And then Kamala Harris cast the tie-breaking vote for the Inflation Explosion Act. So mortgage interest rates are higher, home prices are way higher, and now Americans can't afford to buy a home. That's exactly what's happened, right? You bring in too many people, you have them compete against Americans, and then you drive mortgage interest rates through the roof. That's exactly what Kamala Harris has done. Now, she's also, of course, gone to war against American energy. And energy goes into everything, right? You want to manufacture anything, you need energy. Our farmers want to transport food to the grocery store, they got to do it on trucks. The trucks require energy. So when you raise the cost of energy, then you raise the cost of everything else. Kamala Harris would rather us buy oil and gas from tin-pot dictators all over the world. I think we ought to buy energy from American workers and from American territory, and that'll create a... And Charlie, that'll create a lot of jobs, man, but it'll also drive down the cost of everything. I mean, we have to remember, 30 years ago, and I hear this from Democrats, I hear this from independents, I will hear people say, 30 years ago, our parents just working a normal American middle-class job could afford to buy a home. And they could afford to send their kids to a school where they were gonna get an education and not an indoctrination. And even if you weren't rich, you could trust that your kids were gonna walk down the street in safe neighborhoods. We have taken all of that away, except for the very rich and privileged people in this country, because they can afford private security and they can afford to send their kids to school wherever they want to, and they can afford when Kamala Harris raises the price of energy by 50%. You know who can't afford it? The gross majority of American citizens. And we cannot forget that when these guys say that they stand for the common man or they stand for working people, you know who stood for working people and his policies backed it up? Donald J. Trump for 4 whole years.
And when Donald Trump was president, one of the least reported economic miracles was the blue-collar boom.
Amazing.
Where those that worked with their hands, the muscular class, and I see some of you guys out here, the plumbers, electricians, the welders, those of you that shower before work and after work, those of you that are talked down to by your leaders because you don't have a college degree. By the way, I'm right there with you. I didn't go to college either, by the way. You guys are building the country with your hands, and you're increasingly joining the Republican Party because our values are together. But the muscular class of this country saw their wages go up quicker than even high-income earners. That's what happened when Donald Trump was president. There was a miraculous blue-collar boom. And this is why, JD, everyday voters, they might say, oh, I don't know how I feel about Trump, but my life was better when Trump was president.
That's
my
exactly
life,
right.
We were richer, our communities were safer, we had a border. That alone should decide the election. Can you talk about how blue-collar America, the communities that you represent in Ohio, especially, because that is really the blue-collar center of this country, they were flourishing under Donald Trump.
Yes, they were. And I think it's useful to go back a little bit because we have to remember, and I hate to say it was bipartisan, Charlie. For 30 years in this country, you had Republicans and Democrats united around a very stupid principle that America didn't need to make its own stuff. So who makes 95% of our ibuprofen? The Chinese. Who makes the antibiotics that we put into the bodies of our children? The Chinese. Who makes even some of the weapons that our troops need to fight with? The Chinese. Donald Trump, for the first time in 30 years, said, this is idiotic. We need to make more in America with American workers and for American people. Now, that was a national security imperative, right? Building thousands of American factories, that happened under Donald Trump. Like you say, take-home pay, especially for blue-collar workers, skyrocketed under Donald Trump's administration. So it was a national security imperative, but it also meant that a lot of people were better off. And I just want something very simple, and I know Donald Trump wants something very simple. If you work hard and play by the rules, you ought to be able to afford a home and a nice life for your family. It's very simple. This is not like crazy, you gotta save the world and fix every problem. We just want Americans to be able to live a decent life in the country their parents and grandparents built. It's not so much to ask, we just gotta fire our broken leadership and get somebody who knows what they're doing back in the White House.
Amen. Let's emphasize one of those points. We have a serious housing shortage. You mentioned the illegal issue here of we're competing against foreigners for homes. By the way, what a violation of the social contract that your 25-year-old son, who's an American citizen, gets married, wants to have a beautiful family in Gilbert, and has to go compete against a foreigner for a home? We should not put up with that, okay?
No, we shouldn't.
Our homes should be prioritized for Americans first above foreigners, period. And so, can you speak to that, JD?
Absolutely. Look, Charlie, you put it so well. This is disgraceful. Kamala Harris's entire policy is to import millions and millions of people into this country who violate our laws and then give them benefits that should go to American citizens. We could go down the line. She wants to give them homes that ought by rights to go to American citizens. She wants to give them Medicare. She said this. She wants to give illegal aliens Medicare, which would bankrupt that program and throw millions of American citizens into into poverty. She wants to give them Social Security after American citizens paid into it for 30, 40 years. Kamala Harris wants to give the American dream to people who shouldn't even be here. Donald J. Trump wants to protect the American dream for people who ought to be here, who deserve to be here, and who have fought for this country their whole lives.
Which is a perfect segue to her running mate. Are you guys big Tim Walz fans here?
Neither am I.
By the way, I know what you're thinking. Are you not excited to see J.D. Vance debate Tim Walz? Is that not going to be one of the best things ever? They better have a mercy rule. Who's moderating that debate?
Nora O'Donnell from CBS. And I think what actually might happen based on his military service is he's going to bail out at the last minute, but say he went anyway. I think that's the Tim Walz approach to the debate.
By his own admission, he says he's not a good debater. Okay, I don't know. I don't even know what to make of that. J.D. Vance is one of the best we have, by the way, as you could tell. But let's just look at the record, because not only has Kamala Harris stood for foreigners over Americans in every possible way. Let's look at Tim Walz. Tim Walz, taxpayer-funded tuition for illegals in Minnesota. Correct me if I get any of this wrong.
That's right.
The driver's licenses.
Driver's licenses
for illegals. And also, I know there are other policies as well that were accommodating foreigners in the state of Minnesota. On top of that, there's so much there that needs to be explained, yet he does not take questions. And I want all of you to understand this. If you're an undecided voter watching this at home, because we have millions of people watching this, or if you're an undecided voter here tonight, the ticket that is willing on a daily basis to take questions from reporters is probably the ticket that should govern your country, not the one that runs away from reporters. And if I may editorialize just a little bit more, why are reporters and journalists continually providing cover for the side that won't talk to them?